3, 2,
All right, time for our
1.
next project called the layered paper cut illustration. We say layered because it has layers, just like a cake. You're going to have 4 layers of paper that you cut with an X-Acto knife. And the reason that it's called an illustration is because you are not drawing for this, but you are using an image of a landscape or an image of a scene, and you're putting your own spin on it, taking a little bit of artistic license, and we're really just using basic shapes and basic flat color to show off these different spaces. So it's not realistic, which puts it more on the illustration side. Let's go over the steps that we're going to be doing for this project. Step 1 is the most important step of this project. We're going to be brainstorming, collecting our landscape and scene images. We're going to be planning out our color scheme and also doing our layer planning. Then we're going to be going over some X-Acto knife safety, certain procedures, a little bit of tips and tricks, and of course some practice. And then you're going to get right into cutting all of your 4 layers for your project with your X-Acto knife. Well, we start on the top layer first, and then you can have the opportunity to add paper details. For example, in this Hogwarts scene, I did not have a separate white layer. These are not floating. These are actually glued on to the illustration. And then lastly, you're going to assemble. So you're going to put all those layers together. So let's talk about the requirements for this project and what you're going to be graded on. You get 10 points for your imagery. So does your illustration show a landscape or a scene with 4 layers? Check mark, 10 points. Negative space. Negative space is empty space. And for this project specifically, negative space is going to be space that you cut out. Generally, it's space between objects and around objects. It can also be inside of objects. Here you can see that the negative space actually reveals the different layers that are below. So cutting away paper helps to show the other layers that are underneath. You're going to also be graded on your X-Acto knife craftsmanship with clean and careful cutting, which is again why we're going to be practicing. Paper embellishments, at least one layer we want to see something that features a little bit of added flat paper. It can be something as simple as a star to maybe a little creature that you add or some sort of element to enhance your landscape and scene. Assembly craftsmanship, no visible spacers, lined up layers, no wrinkles, and of course your effort. We want to make sure that whatever you're doing matches the artistic ability that you have and that it really is your personal best. Now let's get into some examples. The top layer that you guys are going to be working with is called your window layer. It is your biggest opening. It's what you cut the most space out. Notice that my top layer still has all of the sides intact here. The next layer is called your middle top layer. It is not as big as my first layer, which allows it to be seen through that window layer, as if you're looking through a window. And then just as I move down to the third layer, it's even less is cut. Now I can see through all the 2 top layers. And then we have the bottom layer, which is solid. This is generally where you would want to add those flat elements that are part of the requirements. So the first example of a window is called a silhouette window. And what that means is that instead of the window being kind of like a wonky shape or being a geometric shape like these examples, you have it the silhouette of something. You have this one, for instance, is a silhouette of a dinosaur, and then you see the dinosaur scene behind and inside the creature. Same thing for the turtle, the whale, the fish. This is a really nice snowman that then has a city scene and a winter landscape inside of it. So the silhouette window can be a really great way for you to tell a story. If that's not quite your scene, you guys can do just a geometric shape, like a circle. You could do something like an organic shape. One thing I do want you to see is in this design right here, we do have those paper embellishments on the top layer. On this one, these are not actually paper embellishments. That's cut circles out of the paper. So you can use the negative space or the cut space really strategically to show more about your artwork. Here's some examples of more simple windows. This artist made sure to also on the very top layer show a little bit of detail. It's not just a window. It has some clouds and it has a city. The possibilities are really endless with this project, and we want you guys to get super creative. We also want you to do something called taking creative license. Artistic license, artistic liberties are all the right words for it. If you see something that you're working with, we don't want you to feel like you have to stick with it. You can change it up and make it your own. You can change up the colors completely if you want to. Now let's talk about brainstorming. For the rest of the demonstrations, I'm always going to be working on 2 layered paper cut illustrations at a time. That is just to show you guys the silhouette option and the shape window option. You are not working on 2, you're only working on 1.
In this top portion, come up with 6 ideas of landscapes and sceneries. Make sure that they matter to you, and also come up with what window that you're going to be using. In this next section, you're going to be coming up with your color plan, the 4 colors that you're going to be using. Also, make sure to decide what kind of colors you're going to be using for your small paper details. You also need to make the decision if you want your picture to go landscape orientation or portrait orientation. Before you start sketching, make sure that you go on Google Images to search for great photos, not other people's pieces of artwork, of the landscape and scenes that you're going to be illustrating. Make sure to save them to your computer, maybe even make a folder on your computer. There's one final thing to go over before we start sketching, and it's working with positive and negative shapes when we are cutting paper away. For any type of shape that you want to stay on your layer, you need to make sure that it is anchored to an outside edge. If you want to cut inside of that positive shape, like say you want to cut a star or a window, you need to make sure that the shape that you're cutting into is actually anchored to an outside edge. With my pink paper here, you're going to see that my star is floating inside of a circle and floating inside of another circle. You're very quickly going to see that it's not going to work. My star, gorgeous. I'm such a good artist. Now I'm going to cut my circle out that's outside my, what? Oh my goodness. Failure. All of my shapes didn't work because they're all floating. So instead, if you want to have a star inside of a circle, you need to make sure that your shapes are anchored. So the star, you would cut out the same exact way, but the circle around the star, you need to make sure is anchored to the outside edge. And then instead of having a circle that I'm cutting out, it's the illusion of a circle by cutting out this crescent moon shape here. Anchor your shapes, people. When you're thinking about sketching out your layers, make sure that you understand the construction of what we're doing. Layer 1 has the biggest opening. Layer 2 moves in a little bit with a smaller opening. Layer 3 has an even smaller opening. And then layer 4 is your solid layer. On this first layer, make sure that you leave a little bit of space around the edges, because remember that your design has to be anchored to the edges. I want to remind you guys that this is a sketch. We would hate to see you spend a week working on what this looks like when it's just a way to plan out your different layers. I like to take a pen or a marker and go around my lines so I know what the clear edges of what I'm going to be cutting for my design. As you move on to your second layer, you'll notice that I'm moving my silhouette line in a little bit. That's to make sure that my second layer shows against my first layer. Make sure that you continue to use your source imagery. Now, when I start to work on Hogwarts, I'm getting to the bottom and I kind of am realizing that I don't really want like a wave at the bottom. I really want to make sure that I can make cuts inside of Hogwarts for the lights and the rocks. So I want to make sure that I actually don't make a cut at the bottom. Instead, I just make negative shaped cuts, not a shape all the way around. I'm going to make sure to do colored pencil to show that that is my black layer. You should do that on all your layers. I didn't do it on my first because my first layer is white. As I move on down to my third layer, I know that I want to have flames that are behind Hogwarts. So the actually area that I'm going to be cutting and carving is going to be less and less and less. Again, I want my lines to go all the way down to the bottom. Here you're going to see me stopping for a second and realizing that I made a mistake. I forgot to include some windows that I want to cut out on the black layer. So it's really simple just to go back and make those corrections and do the correct, the correct coloring. On my last layer, I really don't have to do much of anything other than touch up, color a solid layer. This is also a good time to make sure that you know where you want to put some paper embellishments. I forgot some windows, and I also am going to put some black flames glued to the back yellow layer. The process for a shape window is not very different from a silhouette window. What makes this piece that I'm doing so different is that I actually want to have a palm tree kind of hanging off the edge. So I want to make sure to anchor, 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 instead of just having the palm tree floating in the middle where it might be sort of flimsy. I'm making sure that some of my palm leaves actually attach to the outside edge, further strengthening my piece. The second layer on my sunset is a little bit tricky. I still make those lines and move them inside of my previous layer, but I'm actually going to use a dotted line on the bottom because I just want to know where that line would be. I don't actually want to cut that line because I'm going to be cutting out those wave shapes so that it reveals pink behind my purple layer. Now here's where it gets tricky. I want those clouds to be positive shapes, meaning that I'm not cutting them out, but I'm cutting around them. So if this confuses you, talk to Mrs. Cantrell or I, because it is a little bit confusing because I'm cutting out the waves, which are going to reveal the layer underneath, but I am leaving the purple clouds and cutting away the sky so that that way the sky is pink. As a reminder, negative space reveals the layer underneath. It is your cut space. If you would like positive space to stay, like I want the clouds to stay and the base of the water to stay, I want to make sure that I have those areas anchored to a paper edge that is part of that layer. It's a little bit tricky, I know, but I know that you guys can handle it. Just remember, cut reveals underneath, positive stays that color of the layer that you're on. As I move into my third layer, which is pink, I move my edges in a little bit more, decide what I want to anchor to be a positive shape, what I want to remove to reveal orange. Now I'm just putting orange for my last layer. I'm also going to add some yellow sun rays as my paper detail that I'm going to add flat. Now it's time to take these sketches and break it down. We're going to start from the top and move to the bottom, just how the openings start larger and get smaller. You want to make sure that you have a good plan of what you're going to do. I went ahead and cut my examples so that you guys could have a better idea of why we want to make this plan, so that we make sure when we layer them up, everything looks the correct way. Just like with the sunset, I'm making sure I'm doing landscape first. And I have my layer 1, my layer 2, my layer 3, my layer 4. You can see I glued some yellow on top of that orange right there. As you guys move into the breaking it down into layers process, I want to remind you to sketch and to please don't search out perfection. This is to really just help your mind get the idea that layer 1 is the largest shape. Layer 2 is a little bit of a smaller cutout. Layer 3 is the smallest cutout, and layer 4 is the solid shape, generally with some type of embellishments as well. Please, please, please do not get super caught up on making everything look perfect and lined up. We're not looking for that. Mrs. Cantrell and I are looking to make sure that you understand the way that this process works before getting your paper. Something that really helps me when I'm drawing out these little designs is making little notes like, oh, don't do this here, or hey, these little lines mean that you need to cut. Add notes, add arrows, add little diagrams to your sketches. Again, if you turn this in just like this is great. This shows me that you understand the process. Please don't search for perfection. Once you get both sides of your brainstorming paper done, it is time to check with Mrs. Cantrell or I, and we will approve you to go get your astrobrite paper, your 4 pieces. Don't get a piece of paper for your embellishments. That could be made from small scraps later on. Take your brainstorming paper, fold it in half, and slide your astrobrites in it. Now take that whole little packet and put it inside of this envelope that we give you. Make sure you write your name and period on it. Now put that envelope safely inside of art folder.